Hi guys, so I'm going to do an art history timeline. This is a very cursory entry-level timeline going from very beginning all the way to the end. Just kind of talking about the highlights of time basically, and all these different cultures kind of smooshing together and what we've been studying all year long. So I'm going to start with global prehistory, where it all begins. Now, global prehistory, we have it split between Paleolithic and Neolithic. And the big difference here between Paleolithic and Neolithic is that Paleolithic are hunter-gatherers, right? So they're fighting for their food, and Neolithic are our farmers. We'll pretend that's wheat. This is not like considered civilization yet, because global prehistory means it's before writing. That does ignore, oral history traditions, but for the sake of the context, that is the big difference. So when we're looking at our artwork, we're seeing a lot of innovations and the beginnings of art and how people are expressing their world before they express themselves through writing. So we have things like Glasgow's Hall of Bulls, where we see that composite view, potentially some hunting magic by a shaman. We see the Apollo 11 stones, where it was traveled from a different site, called Apollo 11 because the Apollo 11 spacecraft happened around the same time they discovered it. We have running horned women, lots of things where it is parietal art found in caves, or it's something that they were picking up, moving, and carrying forward. While our Neolithic ones, they had to have been settled to be able to produce things like ceramics. Our ibex beaker, for example, takes a lot of time. We've done some ceramics, some of you guys, so seeing how long ceramics takes, they have to be settled in one spot to be able to do clay. We have our Lapita terracotta fragments, where we see the kind of beginnings of some designs that carry into the Pacific. That's clearly Lapita, can't you tell? And Stonehenge, where they're able to really start building, and they're expressing some unknown, because we're not quite sure, cultural stuff through either ceremony or funerary rites or healing centers. They have a settled Woodhenge close by, may have to do with the solstice and calendars. And that is the general idea of prehistory. Jade Song as well. Now, the cool thing with global prehistory is that it is global prehistory, right? So our big civilization before it's civilization, words, right? We have pop-ups across the entire globe. So we do have people starting in Europe with Lascaux, but our big ones are gonna lead into Egypt, is going to be a big area in Content Area 2, Mesopotamia, the China, and the Indus River Valley. And if you're like, Indus River Valley, that's India. So these are kind of the powerhouses, this like Middle East, Africa, a little bit of Europe. The Americas are doing their own thing. We deal with the Americas a little bit later, such as like the Tlachtlico, right? The two-face hips. So we do see the start of art in the Americas too. Every single place is got stuff going on. So once global prehistory is going, then we get Content Area 2, which is those early civilizations. So the big shift between global prehistory and like ancient Mediterranean and all the early civilizations is this concept of civilization. Now, civilization is a loaded term, so that's where timelines get a little wiggly here. But the idea is a writing system. So with that in mind, we have a few locations. We have Egypt. We have Mesopotamia, or the Near East. We have China, and we have India as like the big early civilizations. Now, the first one really that we had like talk about first, it's the first writing system that we know of, is Mesopotamia. So with Mesopotamia, we're looking at this idea of the Fertile Crescent, which is the land between two rivers, that's Mesopotamia, Tigris and Euphrates. And because we have these two rivers, we have very consistent agriculture and settlements, natural barriers, lots of ability to farm and get resources, which creates settlements within this area between the two rivers and develops into government systems, religion. The farming takes on a lot bigger scope than the Neolithic farming, so it is now fully settled and they are developing as a culture. So not just people, but an actual culture. And we see that in the different parts of Mesopotamia. Sumer's like the first big one there, and Sumer's like down towards here. Sumer, Sumeria, the Sumerians, these are the people that kind of come up with that first writing system. They are recording things. It is cuneiform, again, that we currently know of. And cuneiform is a really cool system of lines and triangles, and they're using a triangular tool on clay tablets to record taxes, stories, important documents, religious texts, religion pre-monotheism. And their art reflects this idea of writing being important. They also invent a kind of important thing, which is the wheel. So we have our standard of ore, which is showing off their king. We have a strong government system. We have the two-sided war and peace concept. We have chariots showing their invention of the wheel. They are organized. They are both peaceful and scary. This is a solid culture, and they're showing that in their art. One of the big things that's going to pop up in this time period are registers. Registers are horizontal bands and how they organize their work. We also see religion with the concept of some sort of deity system. They are polytheistic. They have big gods like Shamash and others that I can't remember off the top of my head. And we see that in our votive figures, our guys with the big eyes, right? They love cylinders. Cylinders are a way of recording writing as well. So they would do stamps of writing on cylinders. So their figures are also cylindrical. The big eyes are better to pray with, and they are locked in looking at the heavens forever. They are funerary. There's tons of these figures within Sumer that they found. Really cool. I love them. They're great. Sumer also has a later civilization called Babylon. And Babylon, with our Code of Hammurabi, is really important for really solidifying law. Babylon is law. We talked about those law codes. They're crazy. But it was a great system for making sure that people follow the rules. Eye for an eye. That looks really funny. And we see that they tie in their narrative stories, their oral histories with their written codes as well, also organized in registers with this stele form. Because we have a heroic Hammurabi standing with the gods. God's still more important because we have hierarchical scale, which is, important people, big. So important. Not important people, small. Other Mesopotamian cultures that are developing, we have the Neo-Assyrians. And the Neo-Assyrians, like the Assyrians before them, are very war kind of centered. They're the Sparta of Mesopotamia. And we have their Lamassu as our work from them, which is this Sphinx Chimera hybrid showing off those powerful creatures. And my favorite thing about the Lamassu are those weird 5 legs that they have, because they are meant to be seen at the citadel. So they stand front and heavy, not allowing you to pass, but as you walk by them, these beautiful legs, I know. As you walk by them, it's showing that you're allowed into the city. So they're about war. We can tell Neo-Assyrian art because they often have this very stylized beard where it's lots of circly, spiral, curvilinear lines. And that Neo-Assyrian style does influence later artworks like those of archaic Greece. Lots of curls. That was an eye. We're going to ignore her. Whee! One thing I forgot to mention with Sumer is also the architecture. Ziggurat. Trapezoidal form, temple on top, staircases that don't quite match to the temple to make sure you are walking, turning, and thinking as you work your way up. This is both government building and religious site. We saw some bone sacrifices, animal bones. So, White Temple, Ziggurat, Babylon, Neo-Assyria. Persia exists too. Persia is kind of an important one. So Persia is one of those big empires. We have Darius and Xerxes with our double-headed animal capital, 72 columns. And Persia is really interesting because they, like the Romans after them and during, are integrating their people within their culture. So like Assyrians, if they conquer you, you're conquered, right? Persia, though, if they conquer your region, you're now part of Persia. So their Apandana, the audience hall, where people would gather to see the king, party, festivities, celebrations, processions, like whatever needed to happen, has a lot of relief carvings that show the different cultures of the people. So it's very inclusive while showing that this is still for Persia, right? So Persia is still number one, but here you can exist within the culture. So overview of Mesopotamia. You can see how kind of intense Mesopotamia gets. Let's take Mesopotamia. We're going to shove her in a corner. Because timeline-wise, while all of this is happening, Egypt's developing. So over in Egypt, while Sumer's figuring itself out, we'll kind of start around here. We have Old Kingdom. Old Kingdom is your pyramids, the very early stuff, pre-dynastic as well. And we don't have any works from Middle Kingdom, but there is a Middle Kingdom and a New Kingdom. And the way that Egypt works is through a dynasty system. And their dynasties are different family lines that then separate these chunks of time period between these larger time scale zone things. I did good. I'm going to also shove Amarna in here. Back to New Kingdom. So, pre-dynastic, we have one piece from pre-dynastic, and that is our palette of King Narmer. And the interesting thing about palette of King Narmer, it was probably for ceremonial use as like an eye palette, right? You crush the minerals, place it there, is that we're seeing this hierarchical scale narrative propaganda with registers of King Narmer uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. And we can tell that from the hats that are seen. We have Upper Egypt's and Lower Egypt's crowns that, when combined, make the combined Upper and Lower Egypt crown. So this was worn by pre-dynastic and Old Kingdom pharaohs. The idea of the pharaoh here, instead of like the kings in Mesopotamia, the pharaoh is a god. They are the human body of the god, and every person has this idea of Ka, like a soul that's connected to your body through your heart. And the pharaoh's Ka was that of a god. So there is this consistent use of mummification. And mummification would be to preserve the body, to preserve the Ka, so that in the afterlife they can continue as rich and powerful and themselves as possible. Egypt works in almost a straight line of thinking, where you have life, death, afterlife. I said straight line and then I didn't fit it. Isn't that great? Life, death, and afterlife. It just continues. And that informs a lot of their art. So again, we have like the Great Pyramids. This is a big show of power. It's very organized. You have to be able to have control of your kingdom to be able to show that, like, to control and manage this many people to build such a large structure. And the pyramid as a concept is a sun ray frozen in time. Underneath, like within it and underneath, like the mastaba, is the actual tomb where the pharaoh would be buried, but the pyramid is that kind of monument to the pharaoh. And we have the three in Giza, the big pyramids of Khafre, Khufu, and Menkaure. Menkaure we also have a statue of with its Menkaure. And can't you tell it's Menkaure? It's beautiful. Ooh, what side is he on? That side. Menkaure and Our Lady, which they don't know if it's wife, goddess, mother. She does have a little belly showing she had kids. But we do have our statues kind of emerging from the temple. And we see the Egyptian pose, closed fist, left foot forward, very idealized with a smooth torso, very simplified features so that it is, it's not individualized. It's like a perfect ideal. All the pharaohs pretty much look the same in this ideal style. You have the Nemi's headdress being used. Usually has the cobra, Sekbet, and I forget the other one, already starting to be portrayed here in Old Kingdom, right? And as Egypt develops, it pretty much stays very similar all through time. I'm going to get rid of the middle and slide new up. Egypt is big about its god system, where, same with all these earlier cultures, or even later cultures, religion's always important. We have their architecture, their art is connected to religion, and their religion is polytheistic. We have a couple major gods that we see, Amun and Ra, later becoming Amun-Ra. Very important, that's sun god, and kind of like the god of gods, hence the frozen in time sunbeam. We also have it aligning with the rising and setting sun. Rising sun is life, setting sun is death, so rising east, setting west. We have our other architectures from Egypt kind of aligning with this as well. So our temple of Amun-Ra with the hypostyle hall is an axial plan that lines up again with our cardinal directions to align with the sun. Statue of Amun-Ra would be at the end, and it gets harder and harder to work your way in as you go. Temple of Amun-Ra is also known for its papyrus capitals because papyrus is super important to the Egyptians. Papyrus grows on the Nile River, which is the main river of Egypt, and they have two different capitals, columns, right? The top of columns, showing off the bud and the flowering papyrus. Papyrus is what they would use to then write Egyptian hieroglyphics, and the hieroglyphics are even portrayed on the columns themselves. We do see that hypostyle hall, which is the row of columns with clear paths and a roof. Hypostyle hall is great for organizing people, controlling flow, really good piece of architecture to remember, because a lot of this is going to carry on to Greece, Rome, Christian churches, modern buildings. Temple of Amun-Ra is a big one. Hatshepsut, her mortuary temple, also big. She's a lady pharaoh. We love a lady pharaoh. And hers aligns axis-wise with Temple of Amun-Ra, so that she's portraying how important she is as well as a female pharaoh. She had to kind of really push that envelope and be seen as equal. And then they, rewrote her out of history for a little bit. But they did that with a lot of pharaohs. There is a break in New Kingdom with the Amarna period. And this is the one time where we have a monotheistic early religion with Aten. Aten is a different god. He's also kind of a sun god, right? And Aten is only brought in and worshipped by, I'm going to spell this wrong, Akhenaten. There we go. So Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and his three daughters are showing this Amarna period. Whoops, that's my eraser. This Amarna period in which we see more of these exaggerated features. Still an ideal, just a very different ideal. Instead of perfect, smooth bodies, we see large heads, we see bellies. Head meaning smart, bellies meaning rich because they're full. We see more detail on the face that kind of looks closer to maybe how they were actually looking. So it's still idealized, just a less very strict ideal. And then Nefertiti being seen as an equal here. Nefertiti, another big female figure in Egypt. She is also being portrayed alongside Akhenaten, which is the pharaoh that worshipped Aten. And then we see that in the little rays of life with our unks. And then three daughters, showing a nice kind of family scene. Very different than our other Egyptian stuff. But after Akhenaten was gone, they said, nope, we're done with that. We're back to business with King Tut. Sarcophagus, mummification, back to the ideal. He looks exactly like previous New Kingdom, with the goatee, the nemes, the sekbet, all of the same stuff, crook and flail. Back to how it was before Akhenaten. So King Tut, we know him because of how preserved his tomb was. So it's a representation of that mummification process, pulling organs out, sticking it into jars, moving all of the stuff into the tomb so they had it in the afterlife, again, to preserve Ka. Ka, important. And that's kind of the overview of Egypt. So while Egypt is happening, let me get around. Slide that in here. Egypt is going to outlast Mesopotamia as we study it. Persia continues forward. So kind of placing that, sorry about the glare there, placing that all in time, that's all happening at the same time. All right. So then this is all happening in the like Western world. We use the term West and East very loosely because it's kind of this very old school way of looking at it. But if you ever see West versus East, West refers to Europe and America, and East refers to the like Asian sphere. It's pretty much anything to the east of the Urals in Russia. But just to kind of pop on over to what's been going on there, I'm using a new brush, new day, new colors. Let's go. China and India are developing their own civilizations during this period. We're actually not really looking at these ones because our earliest artwork with China is going to be kind of more down this way. Same thing with India. It's going to be down here. With China's early development, we have some dynasties that it's not like the first official dynasty. So down here, while the Greeks are happening, so I'm holding off, that's when we get our Qin dynasty. In India, Hinduism is developing pretty early on because they have the Indus River Valley. And China's developing along the Yangtze. Sorry, pronunciations. There's two major rivers in China, and I can't remember the second one. I'm so sorry. So we have these early settlements around there. Civilization, as it is described here, kind of happens around the Greeks. So that's all happening early into civilization, into deciding a lot of the architectural language, the sculptural language, and the 2D language of art going forward. So once you have that, we're now getting butt up to like the CE. So this is all BCE stuff. Egypt does kind of continue beyond it a little bit, but the Greeks do kind of not like wipe them out, but they do get rid of them. So we're looking at, let me confirm, we're looking at around to 1000 BCE for like Mesopotamia, roughly. This is very rough. Egypt's going to go towards well into the 500s, almost up to year 0. So they're going to coexist with the Greeks. So Egypt still goes. Boop, boop. Then the Greeks are showing up in our towards the end of the BCE range. So earliest we're looking at with Greeks is BCE. When I think of the Greeks, I'm looking at those like 200 BCE zone. That's where a lot of the art happens when we think of like the Hellenistic stuff, right? So again, just very rough estimates. We're going to go get rid of that. Let's move on to those Greeks officially. Greece is going to develop. This is in our Aegean Sea, so it's got a lot of islands. So because it's a very islandy region, they're going to develop these city-states. And a city-state is, I like to think of it as bigger than a city, larger than a state. They have their own cultural identity. They function like states, but they're much similar size to like cities. This is Athens, this is Sparta, this is Carthage, any of those kind of major players in this Greek sphere. Just time-wise, we have with the Greeks 3 major time periods that we're looking at. It's archaic, it's classical, and it's Hellenistic. Like so, right? So archaic is roughly, again, we're just rough. 1000 BCE, that's even a big estimate there, up until like, I don't know, we'll say the 550s BCE. Again, rough. Don't take those dates. Look at the ones in the notes. But we know it's archaic because they're still borrowing heavily from Egypt. The thing to remember with these civilizations is that they are interacting with each other. They're right next to each other. There's water. They have boats. They're trading. they're not isolated in time. And because Greece and Egypt exist simultaneously, that's where we get our good old Egyptian pose coming back in our archaic Greek statues. So it's the clenched fists, it's the left foot forward, their left, right? Left foot forward, very tight stance. But we're also influenced by those Mediterranean with the really tight curls on the hair of our archaic Greek statues. So we have Anavisos Koros and the Peplos Kore. And we see that braided hairstyle, the Egyptian pose on Anavisos, and we have this contrast of the ideal male youth. So Koros, meaning young man, Kore, meaning young woman. The Koros statue is in the buff. He's nude, he's naked, and we see this development of the ideal man being this muscular, toned, but youthful body that is portrayed in the nude. While the female, we're going to turn this into the female, is not nude. She is clothed because that's big no-no. How could they show women without clothes? But here, look at the guy without clothes. And we see that immediately with our two Koros figures that we have. Anavisos was a grave marker for a soldier, so he is this ideal. He is not being portrayed as the person that had died, but more of the embodiment of a young Greek man, what you should be trying to obtain, this almost godlike human. And it serves as propaganda too. Why not join the army? Look at how happy they are. Speaking of happy, that's the big giveaway on archaic style, is that archaic smile, right? That, oh, look at me, I'm so happy. This comes from this concept of like the well-being in death. So death gets played around with as a big concept here in a lot of these civilizations. It does today too. And how the different cultures deal with death show more about their ideals, their culture, their lifestyle. So the archaic Greeks are looking at death as not something super scary. Look at how peaceful it is. So that's where we get that archaic smile. It looks like it needs to be a sun. There you go. There's Apollo now. Where our Peplos Kore, we have a really interesting female statue there because she could be a goddess. She could be the embodiment of female youth. It could be Artemis. It could be Persephone. We don't have an arm, so we have no idea what that could possibly be. But we do see this language, this canon arrive of the major styles. We also get in the archaic Greek time period our agora. This does get added onto a ton, like throughout all of classical into Hellenistic. This is our walking and talking. So we have philosophy being talked about as a major thing, starting all the way in archaic Greece. Philosophy, philosophy, philosophy. They love philosophy. They love math. They love thinking. They love science. The Greeks are really into the concept of learning, and philosophy is the thinking about your thinking and how we think, and you have major players there like Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, each approaching philosophy and the truth in a very different way. You have mathematicians like Pythagoras. And all of these advancements are going to be super important to how their architecture develops. So for the agora, you need these open spaces and these open air markets organized in these little rows called like stoa, where it's this not quite a hypostyle hall, but functions similar as the hypostyle hall, where it's this outdoor walkway covered with a colonnade. And this allows for people to walk and talk and discuss all their favorite things that they love so much. And that gets translated down into classical Greece. So I'm going to Move all the science and math. Whoop, up there. Greece loves science and math and thinking. So with classical Greece, now we're looking at, give or take, again, this is very, very rough. We'll just say like 500 BCE up to like 400 BCE, roughly. Again, don't take these dates as fact. I'm like thinking it through. So with our classical Greece, now we're taking these foundations that happen in archaic Greece and we're building on them and finding that typical Greek style, very classical, right? So when we get to our statues, the Egyptian pose goes away and we get good old contrapposto. We love our contrapposto here. So we have the bent leg and locked leg. That gives a lot more natural pose, makes the person feel a little bit more grounded in reality. So contrapposto, counter pose, posto. 2 S's? Contrapposto. We also see the slight development of the S curve. S curve curves the body slightly in the shape of an S. And we get this with spear bearer. Spear bearer would have had a spear in his hand. And the one we have is a Roman copy. It's marble. Classical Greek version would have originally been in bronze. They melt the bronze down to make weapons and money in the future. But Rome made sure to make those copies since they copy-pasted Greek's entire culture, but just a little bit more Italian. So the Doryphorus, spear bearer, is actually, because of how profound he is, Polykleitos, the artist, did a lot to really, like, mathematically, for the Greeks, find that ideal. Everything is measured, like the knuckle proportion to the hand is all specifically measured because the Greeks love math. So the ideal is mathematical. It's still nude, it's still muscular, but there is that added level of math to it. And this pose and Polykleitos' work becomes so popular that this is going to inspire works in Rome, like Augustus of Prima Porta, in the Renaissance, like David's Donatello, and even into neoclassical George Washington. Like, it's forever and always this spear bearer and other similar statues that really inspire culture here. And we see a lot of this similar, let me move contrapposto here, similar approaches to our female figures as well. We see our female figure with the grave stele of Higiso, but we get, instead of the nude male, just like we saw in archaic, she is still dressed. The difference now with classical is that you do still have your contrapposto. Grave stele of Higiso is seated, but the other figures in contrapposto, that's the one that they're handing the necklace that was painted on, that one. The hair is a lot more natural, and we have wet drapery. And wet drapery is that concept of the clothes looking like they are wet to contour to the body. It's showing off the body while still saying they are clothed. This is the way around showing the nude female form without her being scandalous and actually nude. So that's how they do it. We also have a couple other big things in classical Greece, such as the Greek pottery. So we have, that's close enough. Our Niobid crater here, crater being the style of pot that it is. And we see in the Niobid crater, I like this one a lot because it shows that transition between archaic to Hellenistic, where you have all these figures, this red figure pottery, because the background's black, the figures are red. You see this red figure pottery where they have more realistic body proportions, but there's still a sense of flatness. Like, you can't quite tell where they are in space besides some minor overlapping. So it is a transitional piece And pottery tends to reflect the murals and the wall paintings that we no longer have. So even the Niobid crater, for example, on the back, has Hercules standing towards the middle top, showing kind of a war and peace and type thing. We have that Hercules could possibly actually be based on a wall painting or a statue, because we see under Hercules is this little tiny, tiny platform. And then look back on the story of Niobid crater. It's a good transitional piece. Lots of mythology, and we love our mythology here. And then lastly, architecturally, the Agora stands at the base of one of the most important buildings that ends up being copy-pasted by a bunch of cultures as well, and that is the Parthenon. Parthenon, with the Acropolis, really important Greek temple, and this would have been a temple, an area for Athena, because this is in Athens, and Athens is devoted to Athena. The Acropolis itself means high on a hill. Acrobats, right? They up high. So the Acropolis is an outstanding feat of architectural prowess. Look back at those big architectural terms, because most of them come from this region, like pediment and frieze and triglyph and metope. And if you don't remember those, you should probably go study. We also have our columns. Columns are super, super important as they get reused quite a lot across cultures. It is on a platform, raising things up higher is very common along most cultures. We have the start of our different classical orders, so column orders, right? We have Doric, no base, boring top. We have the Ionic with the volute top. Very tiny Ionic, there we go, with a base. And then not on the Parthenon, but we do also have Corinthian, which is more of a floral, pretty exaggerated, little bit thinner, and then a base. So those big, different classical orders start around this time period. There's tons of other elements to the Acropolis. The Parthenon's the main one, would have housed the giant 50-foot statue of Athena, but we also have the Temple of Athena Nike, which is the 4-volute one. Boop, boop, Ionic building. Off to the side, we have Victory adjusting her sandal with the wet drapery. It's got the pediment figures. There's the full plan. We see the caryatids, which are columns that are people. Boop, boop. And I never remember how to pronounce that building. It's like Erechtherian or something. My bad on being totally wrong there. So lots of stuff happening in classical. Once this is like your classical Greece. Once the Greeks kind of figure themselves out, they have their culture pretty set in stone, they start to play a little bit with that idea of emotion and exaggeration. So we get our Hellenistic time period around, I don't know, we're going to put it 200 BCE to right up to the fall of Greece, pretty much. So I'm going to say 100 BCE, but you can make that 50 BCE. Greece doesn't last too much into the CE zone. And our Hellenistic Greek works really show off exaggeration, emotion, drama. They're taking what they've learned as a culture artistically and expanding upon it. So we have things like Nike, winged victory of Samothrace, showing off movement as she stands on the bow of a ship. We have the wet drapery of her legs. It's no longer quite contrapposto because that's not what they're showing. It's not this stoic, serious weight. It's this big emotion. It's grand. It feels like something, even if she's lost her head. You have the seated boxer not showing the like an unrealistic person. There's still, still ideal, still very muscular, but he's worn, he's seated, he's exhausted from a fight, he's bloodied, and his neck is craning back to kind of interact with the viewer in a way that doesn't really make sense. It doesn't work anatomically, but it feels right because the emotion is more important. You have this exhausted, defeated boxer, so of course he's going to be a little bit more dramatic. He has cuts, he's got bruises, the drama. And then even in our architecture, we go from Agora to Parthenon to our great altar of Zeus and Athena at Pergamon. So with Pergamon, it's weird because it's kind of moved, right? But we have this battle between Athena and Zeus, and this could represent, and they have the staircases, right? Stairs, those are clearly stairs. I don't know what you're talking about. And we have this big battle between Athena and Zeus that plays out mythologically, but also with the Greeks versus the Gauls. So this is seen as, theory-wise, a representation of the Greek story at this point. So the Gauls are kind of this, they're like not French, but I think of them as like French Celtic. They're a different cultural group, and at this point they're starting to rise up and be a problem for the Greeks. So they're showing themselves, the Greeks, as Athena, as these wise military people, Athens at the core, and the Gauls as Zeus, as someone that is powerful but can be taken down, who is strong but maybe not the brightest. And they play with Pergamon. There's this statue that's not in our 250 of the dying Gaul. He's got this neckband, he's got this curly hair, I believe he has facial hair too, all very Gaulish. But the cool thing about Pergamon being a Hellenistic statue is that all the reliefs are such high relief, they literally like drip onto the stairs. They're so intense that they cannot be confined to the walls. So this Greek culture between archaic, classical, and Hellenistic set stage for even further development. Greece is so important in understanding where the rest of Europe goes because the architecture, the statues, the paintings, especially the architecture, though, are going to get copied and used over and over and over again. So Greece becomes very, very important, especially since the next biggest group, the Romans, take this and they copy paste. So Greece happens, and then as Greece is kind of finishing up its whole thing, we have Etruscans, which we don't know too much about. They're around 1000 BCE to 270 BCE, roughly. And the Etruscans are going to borrow from Greece, and then they're going to be used by Rome. Poem. There we go. Rome. And Rome, just to show you guys our timing here, is about 30 BCE to 400 CE. They're the year zero bridge. I like to think of them that way. So the Etruscans are happening at the same time as Greece, but they're happening in Italy. So different locations, hence them developing at the same time. But the Etruscans are going to borrow heavily. We see, though, a very different approach to their art because of that concept of death. Again, where the Egyptians had mummification, archaic Greeks had this kind of positive outlook. And that positive outlook, because it's happening about the same time, I'm going to slide them up, about the same time as the archaic time period, but all the way later, we have that positive view of death. Greeks get a little bit more nihilistic and like, oh, let's avoid death. That sounds scary towards the end. But for the Etruscans, they really go, as we've said, party in death, right? Death is just one big thing to celebrate, and their culture reflects that, right? We have sarcophagus of the spouses, which has that nice archaic smile on both of them. But look, the woman and the men are the same size, because the Etruscans, women were seen as a lot more equal to men. So we see that in the sarcophagus of the spouses, that level of equality. We also see how they dress and their approach to art and materials. This one is made out of terracotta. That's how you can tell the difference between Etruscan and Greek with the archaic smile. If it's bronze or marble here, it's Greek. But if it's terracotta, it's Etruscan, because they work with a lot more natural materials, because the Etruscans are also our hippies, and they love nature, they love the outdoors. So we see earth material, we see equality, and we see this very bright, happy look at death, despite... I lost my color. We're switching colors, I guess. Despite it being a sarcophagus, a body would be in there, it's happy. And the same thing in the tomb of the triclinium, where we have the mosaics on the wall, where we have female figures with light skin and male figures with dark skin. Again, they are the same size. Hierarchical scale is not in question here. The scene is a banquet. So it's food at a funeral. So they're celebrating death. It is not a sad occasion, but a time to gather and remember like the good parts of their life. So the Etruscans are looking very positively at death. And that also carries through with their other architectural piece that we have, which is the Temple of Minerva. Now, Minerva is Athena, but the Roman version. So the Etruscans are already using the Greek gods and goddesses, same story, but we're seeing this different name starting to get used. So Temple of Minerva is using the same kind of architectural style as the Greeks, where we have columns, we have a pediment, we have it raised on a platform, so very similar to the Parthenon, but done in a very different way. For one, the columns look like Doric, but they have a base, right? The Greeks were very focused on math. Everything was like illusion to be perfect, but for the Etruscans, it's more about nature. So if you look at the floor plan's quite simple. It has 3 cella, which are the rooms, and then this very large portico being a covered porch-like attachment. It is huge, this portico, because they want to be one with nature. They're more about, again, that natural part, and that goes into what this is made out of. It is made out of wood and mud brick, so it didn't survive. What we have today of the Temple of Minerva are things like the statue of Apollo, which we see the archaic smile still. And the reason why he lives is because it is made out of terracotta once more. And he's clothed, so we're not seeing the ideal male youth of the Greeks, but we are seeing a slight contrapposto stance. Not quite contrapposto because both legs are bent, but just noticing that kind of forward momentum. Braided hair, just like the archaic Greeks, and that is the Etruscans. Now, while the Etruscans didn't make a huge cultural impact because they kind of like come and go out of nowhere, they do influence Rome, and they bring Greek culture to Rome. Etruscans are like pre-Roman Romans. There's this weird in-between period of the Etruscans falling, not sure what happens, and then Rome begins. So Rome. All of this is going on. Rome, based in Italy again, is now using this, building on all this new cultural stuff, and they have a different outlook on the world. For one, they are more military focused, so we're going to see a lot more military driven stuff. They do have this private versus public idea. Boop, boop, boop. In which we are going to see their architecture deal with public spaces versus private spaces. These are two different spheres that shouldn't, for the most part, interact. And when they do, it is still separated. They also have a lot of focus on engineering. The Greeks started off a lot of those big mathematical pushes, but the Romans are going to take it and they're going to apply it. They're inventing a lot. One of those big things is the arch. And once you have multiple arches, it's an arcade. Yay. Pac-Man. Super fun. Can't you tell it's Pac-Man? Arches, arcade, get it? We love it. So the arch is going to be a big one, and then glory to the dome. They invent the dome, the whole raised dome, that's them. They really like to deal with circles. The Colosseum, right, is going to have that big circular structure, and they're able to do all of this along with things like aqueducts and engineering tools, basically like cranes. All of this is happening because they invent concrete, and concrete is a quick way of building strong buildings. We still use it today, although the recipe is a lot different. They do have a much more porous concrete. Let's shrink those down. We're seeing all of these ideas get pushed into Rome. Rome is also this divided time period of the Republic versus the Empire. It's way more complex than that. My brain just was like, yep, that's spelled right. Republic. There we go. The Republic and the Empire. So we're going to see different approaches to art within these different time spans. Greece was a direct democracy. Very limited people could vote, but everyone available to vote got to vote on everything. Rome, a republic, is where you elect a senator or a representative to vote for you. So they, under this republic, are going to have things like forums, which is where the government does their work. The senators come to meet and vote on things. So a senator comes from this time period, and we can see the focus on these more renowned, higher class group based on politics through things like the head of the patrician. So patricians being those in power in the government. Plebeians being the common man, patrician being people like your senators. And the head of the patrician's really fascinating because that's where you see the big giveaway between the Greeks and the Romans, because they find age to be an ideal. They would even age their people up, add more wrinkles to show that they are smart. They have lived longer, they are wise, they carry a lot of civic virtue because they are older. Where under the empire that comes later, Julius Caesar kind of enacts himself as emperor. That's where Caesar is actually used as a term for an emperor, and then Tsar in Russia comes from Caesar. We see the empire's depiction of emperors like Augustus of Prima Porta be those ideals. And with Augustus, you see that propaganda an ideal of him. He is super buff. He is wearing this plate of armor with all the stories of his achievements. He looks super important as an emperor. He's pointing, right? He's an orator. He's talking. He's muscle. Much more muscle. There we go. There's Augustus. But he is in Doryphorus's spear-bearer pose. So you see they are borrowing from the Greeks because the Romans appreciate and acknowledge the Greeks as a strong, powerful force that they have built their history on. So you have that contrapposto stance. Oh, beautiful legs. There we go. Gorgeous. While these statues were portrayed everywhere. So Augustus of Prima Porta, all this propaganda saying how amazing Augustus is, he's so good, we love him, has to be placed throughout the empire, because while Greece was small and you had to deal within city-states, Rome is a vast, vast empire by the time it gets to here. All the way from like Africa into regions of the Middle East, all the way up to Britain. So it is a huge region. Who are they going to listen to? Who is this emperor? He's some random guy in Italy. I don't know him. But if you put statues of the emperor, it helps let you know who's in charge. And then with the empire, they do a very similar thing as Persia, because if you're so big, people are going to revolt against you, because the more you stretch out, the harder it is to listen to people so far away. So they include people within their culture. It's very easy to become a Roman citizen in relation to like previous cultures we've looked at. So people are allowed in, they become Romans, and therefore they get all the perks of being part of Rome. And that plays out in things like our Colosseum, which has 3 tiers, well, 4, but 3 major tiers that are organized into public entertainment. You have the hierarchy of where you sit based on your citizenship. If you are a patrician or someone of notable family, so like even though senators kind of like die off as a concept once you hit the empire, that is still translated. Those noble high families get to sit closer to the bottom where the action is, where they're battling gladiators and, you know, blood everywhere and putting sand down so it works as a litter box. I'm saying things, sorry. So the more important you are, the closer to the bottom you get. But the less important you are, if you're a slave or a woman, God forbid, you're sitting at the top in the nosebleeds. Rome does not follow the Etruscan path of saying women are equal. It follows the Greek path of saying women are not. And then Rome's going to continue this architectural amazingness, great words, between like taking an amphitheater and saying, hey, why not put both of them together, like 2 amphitheaters together. They're also going to have things like the Pantheon. Now, Pantheon different than the Parthenon. We still have a lot of similarities, but the big difference is that the Pantheon, like a frying pan, has a round bit at the top. If you look at the Pantheon on the side, it looks nothing like the Parthenon, because we have the nice little rotunda round building, the dome with the oculus that allows the sun in, all the tiled floors match the tile-looking coffers on the inside, this large portico in reference to Etruscans. It used to be on a platform, it's kind of sunken in now. And it's a pantheon to the gods, except gods for Rome aren't as important. They're not like super actively worshiping all the time, but it is still part of their culture, is the different gods, the pantheon. You have the columns, there's lots of rows of columns leading into it. And lastly, architecturally, you have the Forum of Trajan. Forum of Trajan is going to be this interesting kind of combo here of the actual building versus the column of Trajan. Trajan being an emperor, so we see this devoted to the power of the emperor, the amazing build of this column that wraps around with continuous narrative talking about how amazing Trajan is and all those battles that were fought. You have the basilica plan be used by the Romans. So basilica was invented by them. That's where people would do governmental stuff. You had marketplaces close by. So people were interacting in these regions differently than the Agora. It's not necessarily as much walking and talking because philosophy is not important, but it is shopping. It is government. It is looking at your emperor and saying how awesome he is. It is doing military. So there was like military barracks here as well at the Forum of Trajan. So Forum is a place of gathering with a very different intent than the Agora. On the side, this is obviously not every Roman piece, but on the side there's a little place known as Pompeii, right? And it gets kapoofed by Mount Vesuvius. We do have that building as well. And the cool thing about the House of the Veti in Pompeii is that public versus private space. So you can see that in the floor plan where you have the impluvium, in the atrium being this open area where people would greet guests. It collected, had an opening to collect rainwater, so it was this nice, fresh water pool at the bottom. It had a courtyard to gather around and again enjoy those guests, but then it had the private sphere, the different rooms all within it. So public versus private in the House of the Veti. And then don't forget about your Ludovisi battle sarcophagus, where you later on see kind of the fall of Rome, the horror vacui, the distorted bodies, the fear of the fall of Rome, because boy, oh, did they know it was coming, versus your earlier, in Pompeii, your earlier depictions of war, of like the Alexander mosaic, where Alexander, Greek hero that the Romans loved, fighting off Darius, the Persian leader that the Romans did not love. Horsebutt, that one. So lots of stuff happening in Rome. Rome's kind of a big deal. All right, so now that we're done with kind of this ancient civilization, early civilization, we move to and towards Continent Area 3, which is mostly spurred by the start of Christianity. So Rome, even though we have it ending here around 400 CE, people put the end of Rome at different years. 440 is one of those ones. We take Rome and we split it. So Rome is going to fall, but it falls a little bit slowly. Really, we're going to see a big divide between what is Rome in the West, which becomes kind of the European Rome, and this is medieval pieces. And then we have the kind of Eastern Roman Empire, which is going to be Byzantine. And this time period is known as late antiquity, so it's the late antique era, especially as they are forming, and then we move into that kind of early Christianity. So this is really divided geographically, so say this is Spain and France and Germany. Can't you tell? There's Spain and France and Germany. Italy down here, woohoo, blah, blah, blah. Very gorgeous. There's Britain. And then we have over here is Turkey. Greece is here. My geography bad. Where we're literally splitting the empire in half as it begins to fall. Rome is right here in Italy. And the big thing that causes this fall is Constantine. So Constantine is going to take Rome, the whole empire, and he sees that, Rome's starting to lose its strength. They've spread themselves out so far that they're losing their control. They're losing their power. People are rising up. These people known as the Goths, Ostrogoths, Visigoths, all these different Goths, are kind of pushing in from Germany into the Roman Empire. Germany as it was. So Constantine sees this and he's going to say, okay, the best way to protect Rome, which is close to these Goths, is to move the capital over to Constantinople. And he was, very humble, and he named it after himself. So Constantine moves it to Constantinople. Modern day Istanbul. It's Istanbul, not Constantinople. There we go. And by doing this, Constantinople is a great geographic region. It's on a peninsula of modern day Turkey. It's pretty much protected by 3 sides, mountains, and then the water. It has a great access to trade network between the Aegean Sea, Mediterranean. It connects to the sea that's above Turkey that I can't remember off the top of my head for whatever reason. But it's a great place to put a capital. So it makes sense militarily. But by doing so, we create a rift. And part of the reason that we have this rift is just control. Most of, Rome's over there. So therefore, all of a sudden, Rome being over here, you lose control here, and the Goths are like, hey, what's up? And they're going to sack Rome. Bye, Rome. They're going to do it a few times. Sack Rome, and then Rome falls. Oh no, it's on fire. Constantinople does really well. Like, really well, because you're moving the great Roman Empire over to the east. But a big change that comes with this is just this little tiny religion known as Christianity. So Christianity starts as kind of a cult religion. Cult not in the modern sense of the word cult, but like a small religious sect. They start pretty small. It's bubbling up. It is Abrahamic, so it's off of the Old Testament is basically the Jewish Torah. And they take that and add, a new chapter based off of Jesus Christ. And with New Testament and talking about Christ's word and the word of God, and this lot softer version of Christianity compared to Old Testament, there is, it's not popular, but there is a group that are starting to form around Christianity. Constantine, as he is, in charge, Emperor of Rome, he decides to make Christianity the empire's official religion. He says it is safe to worship Christianity. This is the way to go. Big change. So if you think back to the Amarna period in Egypt with Akhenaten trying to make everything monotheistic all of a sudden, didn't go so well for him. It does take root here. Because it kind of spurred up a little bit naturally first. And Constantine even had this big pervasive vision of he saw a cross on from the sky in one of his dreams, and that led him to victory in battle. So he painted a cross on his shield, went to battle, won. So he's like, okay, Christianity is the way to go. And Christianity is going to dominate both medieval and Byzantine art. Here we're in Constantinople and East Rome, Constantinople. I have to say it every time to write it. And here is more of the kind of West Europe. So Christianity is going to be a major force. So we see that happening at the exact same time. Byzantine lasts a little bit longer, consistently, but we're looking at around, we'll say 500 CE to about, we'll say 1300 CE is kind of our range for both of these. The Ottoman Empire is going to take over, I believe the year is 1405. Please correct me if I'm wrong. 1405, 1445, something like that. Cross it out. So we're going to have two very distinct styles develop because they're happening at the same time. They're looking at Christianity at the same time. There's a lot of similarities, but really the art is completely different. And you see that cultural impact, especially when you compare them side by side. So, for example, with some early Christian art, even going back as far as 100 CE, when it is persecuted, we have this sense of Christianity kind of finding itself. So things like Catacomb of Priscilla, where we're seeing them trying to play around with the style of what Christian artwork's going to look like. You could see that in the stylized large hands within the catacombs, arched painted walls, so it's borrowing a lot of Roman style, but trying to find its own thing. They're figuring out, do we portray Christ in a human form? Do we portray these biblical figures, or do we leave it up as symbols? So there's this back and forth there. And Catacomb of Priscilla really shows both the style as well as the fact that it is persecuted. Priscilla is taking this huge step of kind of being a martyr to have a place for Christians to be buried safely. So she uses her own estate and allows Christian burials there because it's persecuted. They're not allowed to worship. If you do not worship the Roman pantheon under the Roman Empire, then you are seen as not a citizen, and you don't get the benefits, the rights, and the care of other Romans. And you see that also even as Christianity starts to be a little bit more open and accepting with the Santa Sabina Church. So this is our earliest church. It follows the Basilica plan, Santa Sabina. And Basilica plan does come from Rome because it's a basilica, and that's from Forum of Trajan. It's a very Roman style of building, but now we have some extra little additions. So our arches, these are our arches on columns, so it's an arcade colonnade combo, do come straight from Rome. It is spolia, meaning it is taken and reused with new context, but we do have the apse here, the rounded bit at the end containing an altar. That's the big change here, where we have that altar for prayer to be conducted and for people to be able to worship. You have things like the narthex for people to gather around, the nave to travel down, the aisles to work your way around. It's very nice, organized, but it has a flat top ceiling, nothing super extravagant. There's some decorative elements on the inside, but it's very unassuming. The outside especially, you can't, discern it too much from any other Roman building. That's the point. They're still, figuring themselves out. It's not the big mega churches that we're going to see pop up in Romanesque and Gothic for a while because persecuted, they want to kind of hide. It's prettier on the inside than the outside because once you're in there, you are most likely a Christian. On the flip side, Byzantine is taking Christianity, they're running with it, and they are going to have the big, clear identifier of it being Byzantine with gold. Lots and lots of gold. Because while medieval Rome, medieval Europe, is disjointed, it's chaotic, it's the Goths having invaded, and now there's tons of cultural groups, this is chaos. Byzantine is still the organized carrying out of the Roman Empire, just with a totally different flavor. So Byzantine Empire, very strong, very wealthy, and they show that off in their art. So for example, we have San Vitale with its central plan and a very octagonal dome type thing. I forget the exact word right now, but it is a dome-like form at the top in the shape of an octagon, With a central plan, the idea is that you're working your way around. There's still an altar, there's still an apse. It's not as obvious working your way in there, usually right above the crossing or the choir area. And then in San Vitale, you have these little exedra that help carry the sound. Exedra on the bottom allow for private prayer, kind of like radiating chapels. And then you're working your way around in the ambulatory being the circular walkway in a building, specifically a church here. And San Vitale, besides being, the central plan one, is known for its mosaics. Byzantine loves mosaics. It comes, from Roman tradition. We saw the Alexander mosaic defeating Darius, which is a Roman mosaic of a Greek figure, so lots of crossover. But the Byzantine mosaics are going to start to change a little bit, where Rome did this kind of snake-like way of doing their lines in their mosaics. Byzantine are focusing more on this kind of stylized representation of people, where we get them almost like floating. This is where we start to see this kind of Christian style being developed. Their feet don't really carry weight. We're no longer concerned about perfect reality with our representations of human form. It's more carrying on the ideas. So our two big mosaics in San Vitale are of Justinian and Theodora, the emperor and empress, that make this whole thing happen and work. They are major patrons of the arts. San Vitale in particular is in Ravenna, Italy, so they are, even though Byzantine, Ravenna is part of that Eastern Byzantine Empire. And Theodora and Justinian are doing a good job creating a sense of peace, wealth. They're actually kind of seen as equals, which is rare for our ladies. So they are face each other in San Vitale. And you can see what they care about is starting to change. How the two figures are represented, besides being this kind of abstracted representation, we see, especially in Justinian's military, government, him, and religion all together. So military, government, and religion are seen as equally important, which for the first time in a while, religion is up there. Because Rome really gets away from religion. They have it, they're polytheistic, they say, no, don't have other religions, but it's not one of their virtues. They prize wisdom and power and government and military and strength and all these very kind of feelings, rather than more of the spiritual side of it. So that's a big change. And this expands even further in our other building, which is Hagia Sophia, which takes the Roman accomplishment of the dome and they say bet and make it even bigger. So they go real big and do these half domes on the side of it. Hagia Sophia also has minarets because it gets later turned into a mosque. But the coolest part about Hagia Sophia, besides its multifaceted use to me, is that floating dome. On the inside, the clerestory around the dome is so perfectly balanced that it looks like the dome is floating based off of the light coming in. And light is going to represent the presence of God. So light is very important. Clerestories are going to be on all of these buildings because you have to see when you're inside. But this one is so strategically placed in that dome that it feels like it's floating being in there. Those aren't the only windows. They're just important windows. And Hagia Sophia, because it's so big, it needs those half domes and the wider spread to actually carry the load of the weight, right? So it's getting so heavy and so tall. If you spread it out, it makes it a lot easier to carry that weight. So that's what's happening in the architectural world. But both sides are also developing other artistic forms at the same time. Let me move Justinian again. Whee! So San Vitale, Hagia Sophia over there, and then Santa Sabina over here. We have the illuminated manuscript. And illuminated manuscripts are papers with pictures, usually made out of vellum, which is calf skin, or lamb skin, baby animal skin. We love it. We have this portrayal of books starting to be more pictorial. It's more image focused, less text, and we see kind of the start of it in Byzantine again, both of them developing at the same time with our Vienna Genesis. That's the book. And then the picture we have for the Byzantine one here is Rebecca and Eliezer at the well and Jacob wrestling the angel. So 2 pages. And you can tell it's the Vienna Genesis because there's still a lot of text. And then the images are done at the bottom. Rebecca's nice and in pink. She is in continuous narrative. So they're still playing with that carried over from Rome, like the Forum of Trajan. And she's moving her way through this. Architecture represented in here starts to get a little bit more weird, a little bit more abstract. There's this drapery that we see on Rebecca, but it's not as wet drapery as Greece. So they're starting to find their identity. And they're going to both Byzantine and medieval shift to something more stylized. Now, reading is for the wealthy. So already this is going to be geared towards the upper class, the nobility. And then you add all these pictures. Cool, now it's even extra pretty. We love that for the nobles. So books are not something that are getting passed along the average person. It's more for the elite to have on them in their house to show off their wealth. And it's kind of just a play of look at how spiritual I am, look at how fancy my stuff is. In the medieval side of things, the illuminated manuscripts push even further towards the, like we have the Lindisfarne Gospels, they're pushing more towards the pictorial. Beautiful Lindisfarne Gospels, I know. So we have things like the St. Matthew cross carpet page, the St. Luke portrait page, and we have the St. Luke incipit page. Now that's a lot of terms, but in manuscript talk, a carpet page looks like a carpet. It's usually designed with lots of motifs, very horror vacui, very, very fancy. A portrait page is a portrait. It's a person. And this time we have text here and here. And a little bit up here, a little bit up here. And that's like it. And then we have, just like our SpongeBob trying to write an essay but can't, on the incipit page it's got the big old letter. And then the text. And then the text. And the text is done so perfectly, so precisely, because the people that are doing the books, they're not like your hired artists that we're going to see in the Renaissance or before in Rome and Greece, but they are monks. They are working in the monastery, and part of their job is to create these Bibles or different books within the biblical canon. So they're doing these very detailed, very elaborate inkings and penmanship, again, for the elite. So this would be for priests, for nobles, anyone who wanted to commission one that could afford it. So we're seeing illuminated manuscripts in both sections. This is kind of the later one. This is influenced by Celtic work and the Holy Roman Empire. So, Holy Rome. Good old Holy Rome. So the Holy Roman Empire is one of the moments in history in which people pretend that they still have a Roman Empire. It has nothing to do with Rome. It is not in Rome. It is, I guess, holy in a way that it's Christian, but so is Byzantine. Byzantine doesn't call themselves Byzantine, by the way. They just call them the Roman Empire. But Holy Rome is going to be this collective mishmash of German cultures that gets kind of unified under leader Charlemagne. That's a spelling. Charlemagne, and he leads with his kind of dynasties, the Merovingians, Carolingians, these other subgroups of German peoples that would be too much history to get into right now. But the big thing is, think of Holy Rome as this Germanic empire led by Charlemagne, which leads us to our Merovingian looped fibulae, which has that animal style motif. Animal style very popular in Celtic art and in Germanic art, bringing in nature, because Germany and Celtic regions were both very nature-based prior to the influence and kind of forced conversion into Christianity. So you have this animal representation. There's birds, there's fish, there's tails, there's like everything is very over the top. It's gold, it's silver, it's gemstones, garnets, it's inlaid, it's super fancy, and that's just the little part on your big old toga cloak here, right there, that holds it all together. So that is a fibulae. But I like looped fibulae for showing off that very classic medieval type of style that you would see in something like Sleeping Beauty, or Shrek even, right? It's this very gold, glitzy, over-the-top crosses and animals and gemstones all over the place. So that's the Merovingian style, kind of influences our Lindisfarne Gospels. It's all dealing with around the same time, roughly. So that's kind of the stage here. Hot mess potato soup over here. Nice, clean, crisp over here. It stays pretty solid, like I said, until the 1400s when the Ottomans take over. Because Byzantine is so stable, we don't really see them again in art history because most of their art kind of carries through. It's very, very similar. You see the Madonna and Child concept pop up with like Virgin Theotokos, child between Saint Theodore and George. That's very kind of early Byzantine. My marker here is going insane. Where Mary starts getting represented a lot. She is the throne of wisdom because Christ is wisdom. We have man baby Jesus sitting on her lap. He's supposed to look like a man because he is more than a baby. He is born with all the wisdom of Christ and of God. We have holy figures being depicted with these very flat, round halo discs. And they're very stilted. And Byzantine's going to play with this more and more of the Virgin Mary in her blue. And they're going to develop this very clear canon of the almond eyes, the arched brow, the thin nose, the tight lips that becomes synonymous with Mary, the veil, all of that flat disc. In Byzantine art later will have these big bright lines of gold for their drapery. Very flat. The throne she usually sits on is a representation of whatever church that she's being placed in. So it's stylized and becomes more stylized. That's what Byzantine art looks like. So what happens to Europe after this? We're still considering this the Middle Ages, but we're going to switch fully to Europe. We're going to step away from Byzantine. They're doing their own thing. It's all looking pretty much the same. But early medieval develops further into the Romanesque. We love bringing back Rome over and over and over again, and it's no different here, even though, Holy Rome was just there. Now we're going into the Romanesque time period. So we're now in about the 1000 to... I never know where to place Romanesque time-wise. We'll say like 1200. That's give or take. And Romanesque, it's more of an architectural style Romanesque. We're going to be able to tell Romanesque by the change of churches. Santa Sabina, San Vitale, even Hagia Sophia, they're tame in comparison to what's coming in Europe. So this is all Europe. And the one that we have is the Church of Saint Foy. This is happening in France. We see France is going to start becoming a major player in the art world, especially in our Romanesque and Gothic time periods. France really kind of steps it up on the architecture. And Church of Saint Foy in Romanesque really highlights all the major parts of Romanesque architecture. It takes a butt ton of time to finish, almost 100 years, because it's so massive. It's got large, chunky bell towers. It has layers of other buildings around it. It's very thick. The doorway, sorry for my language, but the doorway is going to have this big tympanum, and I'm, simplifying this here. Big tympanum with its doorways. Usually we have a triple doorway because the Holy Spirit, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Holy Trinity, And in the tympanum of St. Foy, we have the scene of the Last Judgment. Last Judgment is kind of this apocalyptic scene that happens in the book of Revelation about it's the end of the world and Christ is coming down to save those who are good and are believers. They're bringing them to heaven and then banishing all the evildoers, the sinners, to hell. A scary thing to put above a doorway, but that's what they do a lot of the times, is they put the Last Judgment to make people want to come to church. Yes, Christianity is the major religion, but there's still a lot of different cultures that are not converted to Christianity yet. So they're trying to pull in as many people as possible. A, because to spread the word of God. B, to gain more money. Tithings and donations go a long way for a church, and as churches get bigger, they need more money to build. The interior of St. Foy also very clearly shows that Romanesque style because they have the barrel vault. Barrel vault comes from Rome because it's that arched roof of kind of carrying through the arches that Rome developed, put a bunch of arches next to each other down a corridor, and boom, now you have a barrel vault. Anytime the barrel vault is going to intersect with another one, that intersection of the two vaults is known as a groin vault. Romanesque is more about this big barrel vault nave. We're going to come back to the groin vault. The reason why the church gets bigger and the barrel vaults becomes important also has to do with the floor plan and the function of this church, because we're going to get a couple new things. Number one is this guy right here, which is the transept. And the transept, this horizontal addition here, the transept is A, looking like a cross, more Christian if it looks like a cross, but B, it's allowing for pilgrimages. Now, pilgrimages, that's kind of a new big thing for Romanesque. Pilgrims are coming to see things. That's what they do. They're taking a holy mission to go and see a thing. In this case, for St. Foy, it is the reliquary of St. Foy, which is a child martyr that they say have the bones of the martyr inside the reliquary. And just like in Africa, that was a lot of likes, I apologize. in Africa, we have the reliquary figure that protects the relics. Same thing here, where you see the reliquary protecting the relics of Saint Foy. So the idea is that Saint Foy's reliquary is placed here, roughly, give or take. Pilgrims are able to come in one transept, move around, and get to see the relics within the radiating chapels. They pray, and then they take off and leave through the exit. That allows for people in the congregation, still the nave, the aisles, etc., to be able to still carry through their normal mass. The preacher is doing their thing, people come to the altar, communion's happening, all the fun churchy things are happening here while the pilgrims can pass through. This also helps, gain traction for the church and money, etc. So they're going bigger to accommodate this new style of church going, these pilgrimages. And as they're going bigger, they're still figuring out the architecture. This isn't concrete, that's kind of gone. It's stone, and it's heavy, and it's really thick. So Romanesque, they don't know how to alleviate that weight quite yet. So their piers, which are the part that's actually the load-bearing part, are really thick. So if you're looking at the interior of the church, you can tell it's Romanesque by how chunky those piers are. It's a big church. So the three kind of story of the bottom, middle, and top registers, or the bays, are going to be pretty, but with Romanesque, it is a lot chunkier. Which then brings us to Gothic. Oh yeah, the Bayeux Tapestry is here too. Yay, William the Conqueror, England exists. Yay, England. There's Romanesque. That's the historical piece about England becoming a thing. Yay, William. Okay, Gothic. With Gothic, we see the church going even crazier. They are figuring out their architectural style. They're able to play around with the scale of things, with the techniques. So the architects are going bigger. So we have Chartres, and with Chartres, once again in France, we have this really cool blend of high Gothic and early Gothic, because Chartres at one point burned down. So we have the front facade. Usually we're looking at the west facade with the two bell towers. This time they have spires on the top that are very elaborate. One, the left one, way more elaborate than the other, because we have that difference between the high Gothic that was rebuilt and the early Gothic, which was the original. We have stained glass windows. Stained glass windows are now a thing. There's lots of architecture terms about windows. So check those out as review. You have your 3 doorway, your 3 windows, the rose window dedicated to Mary typically, which is your stained glass, really pretty reflective piece there. On the inside, they are now doing ribbed vaults, where you see the vault acting like a groin vault all the way across. It's impossible to draw at this angle, I'm so sorry. Where they're taking the concept of the pointed arch and adding ribs all the way through so it's more decorative. So they're pointing the arch and adding decorative ribs. We see the pointed arch in the tympanum outside that's showing kind of the story of Christ and Mary. We see Mary being portrayed in stained glass. This one is devoted to Mary. It is Notre Dame, Our Lady. We see the transept, crucifix plan, apse, all of that. Again, we have an expanded choir now, so there's a larger space there. We have more radiating chapels. Each facade has extra elements to it. It is very decorative. And the way that they make this possible is they're pointing the arches, which allows the load bearing, just like Hagia Sophia, to spread out. But they're also adding flying buttresses. My favorite thing on the planet. A buttress is something that is added for support, like that. So if that's the wall, this is a buttress. Now, a flying buttress is when you take it and you put it up higher. Flying buttress. So by having little support beams running across, you can now have Chartres be even taller, even more extravagant, and a lot thinner. So less of the load bearing is on the piers, more on all of the structure evenly throughout it. That way it stands. Now, this is also a pilgrimage church, but the relic they have is one of Mary's veils. So I believe it's the one she wore when she gave birth. I totally messed that up. But it is a veil associated with Mary, and there's a story that goes with Chartres in which the church catches on fire, someone rushes in, and the church is destroyed, but the veil of Mary survives. And that's their message from God to rebuild it and make it even better. So that's why you have the High Gothic, Early Gothic difference on the bell towers. Other things are happening in the Gothic period as well. So it's not just churches, like the Bayeux Tapestry of Romanesque being a historical narrative. We are looking at some more illuminated manuscripts. They carry throughout all of medieval Europe, and we have a couple of big ones like the Moralized Bibles, or Bibles Moralized Bibles. I can't say it ever. Where we have it 2 pages. The one with all the circles in the writing is the Moralized Bibles. Writing on that side, writing. And the one with the fancy there, it's split into 4 there, where we see the artists actually inserting themselves down here. The artist is down there. That's always, artist there is always super fun. We have kings and queens within the actual religious text. So they're inserting themselves, just like how Byzantine saw government, military, and religion together. Now it's government and religion together. Less military, more the power of the king and queen. So we see King Louis the Ninth in this piece. We see the scenes from the Apocalypse over here. So it's these kind of more demented stories in the roundels. This is the Moralized Bible. So the big thing with Moralized Bible is you're seeing more of the gold, the development of the illuminated manuscript. You're seeing now how the king is inserted into the Bible itself. So it is a dedication to Blanche of Castile and King Louis the Ninth. So it's religion and kingship / royalty in the same book. We also have another illuminated manuscript that comes at this time that's a very interesting piece because it is not a Christian Bible, but it's actually scenes from the Jewish Torah. And the scenes in this one are Passover. And Passover is the concept of when I would watch Prince of Egypt, shows it really well, but it's the idea that Moses in the, trying to save the Jewish people from Egypt is told by God that all first sons are going to be killed in the night, but if you have the blood of a lamb on your doorway, I will pass over you. So all the Jewish people put blood on their doorway, and then as the God goes through and kills the first sons, they are saved. That is why it is called Passover. Now, I am butchering religious text here, so if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm not going to defend myself there. But that's what we're seeing in our other one, which is the Golden Haggadah, which is the scene of Passover, and it is here to really show that Jewish people also did this. It was not common, and it was often not allowed. Jewish people have been persecuted pretty much forever. So that continues in their art here. So they have plagues of Egypt and scenes of liberation. The fun thing about the Golden Haggadah is that it shows the Egyptians as like French people, as French kings. So in order to relate to people, instead of showing an Egyptian, they're showing what a French king would look like, because the text isn't as important, and especially as learning to read is becoming less important for these books, it's more about the images. You need that quick storytelling. So if you know the story of Passover, it's going to be quick to tell, like, oh yeah, we're in Egypt, without having to show them as Egyptian. So very different approach. There's also the preparation of Passover. I missed a page. There you go. 3 pages. And then lastly, for Gothic, you are seeing this shift towards a more emotional storytelling of Mary and Christ with the Röntgen Pietà. For a long time, Mary and Christ were depicted in this very specific idealized canon. But here in Röntgen Pietà, we are seeing a wood sculpture, which thank goodness it's survived so long, showing Mary that is like absolutely like devastated that her son has passed, so she's becoming a little bit more human. Christ is super dead. He's got blood gushing down. You have pigments there. You see the wounds on his hands. It's very graphic for this time. It's still that throne of wisdom, but here he has been sacrificed and crucified. So this is post-lamentation, holding onto her son. So this Romanesque to Gothic is what is bumping us close right up to the Renaissance, which is crazy to think about how nuanced everything is for a long period of time, and then the Renaissance is going to change everything. And we're going to bring Greece and Rome back again.